During different conflicts over the years, there were many different changes that different armies had to make to adapt to different terrains and environments. During the Vietnam War, one of the most dangerous and brutal soldiers who had to come face to face with the enemy in the most cramped and harsh conditions were known as the tunnel rats. Inside of Vietnam, there were hundreds of miles of tunnels in which the enemy lived in, and they conducted raids upon American soldiers using these. But it was the tunnel rats who were tasked with destroying the enemy in these underground shelters. The tunnel rats were volunteer soldiers and combat engineers from the US Army and also the Australian Army who worked to clear out and destroy the miles and miles of underground enemy Viet Cong networks. At the start of the conflicts, there were huge networks which were expanded by the Viet Cong, and some of them had huge settlements and barracks and even hospitals within them, and there were large weapon stores too. The Viet Cong could remain underground for significant periods of time, and they could move to different locations using the tunnel system to surprise and attack their enemies. The underground tunnel network was not a secret system, and the American and Australian soldiers knew they were there, and the first soldiers who entered the tunnels were the 3 field troops and Australian Combat Engineer Group. These men entered close combat with the enemy, and they were tasked with blowing up and destroying the tunnels, but also killing those enemy combatants inside of them. The tunnel rats became well known, and it was very scary and a feared job. They were also tasked to gather intelligence and information on the enemy, and tunnel rats were given basic weaponry, and some were trained in hand-to-hand combat, and were very skilled in this. They were hardy men who were able to fight in the toughest of places, and they were given a bayonet and a knife, as well as a pistol, a torch, and enough TNT to cause problems and destroy the networks. Often the tunnel rats were short men, and they were around 5'5" and smaller, because they had to negotiate and manoeuvre through the tight corners and tunnels. There were many dangers and hazards that came. Obviously, one was the enemy who they had to come up against, but there was also many booby traps used, and the Viet Cong had a habit of leaving hand grenades attached to tripwires as well as punji stick bamboo traps. These traps, when stood on, would plunge a soldier's foot through, and there were spikes at the bottom of them, and this could cause significant impalement and injury. The screaming would also alert the enemy to the tunnel rat's position, which could equally be dangerous. Also, the tunnels were very poorly made, meaning they could also collapse with the soldiers inside of them. But there was also scorpions and dangerous spiders, as well as snakes and bats that lived in the tunnels. The tunnels were also built in such a way that they could be flooded, and poisonous gas was sometimes used against the tunnel rats. Many of the tunnel rats preferred to go in the tunnel without pistols, as they used knives and other weapons, as if they fired their guns in tight spaces then it would leave them with hearing damage. Some used suppressors at the end of their pistols, and even World War II-style weaponry and sawn-off shotguns were used, but many soldiers died inside of the tunnels, including an Australian engineer who got stuck in a trapdoor between underground chambers, and his soldiers could not get him free. And he then died from suffocation as a build-up of carbon monoxide was inside of the tunnel. One newspaper claimed the life expectancy of a tunnel rat was just 7 seconds if they went into the wrong part. One former tunnel rat stated that, "I could smell the Viet Cong. Really, I could smell Charlie. It wasn't just his body sweat or the urine. There were times where I could hear the breathing, real quiet. You could hear a person breathe and I'd know he was in there. And I didn't go any farther. I just said to myself, in this dark corner of a tunnel is where the animal belongs, a rodent belongs. I'm becoming like a rodent, but still I don't belong. Yes, I could smell Charlie, and he knew me. The type of cologne I used, the aftershave, that's when we stopped using it altogether. But there was no more than that. There was the scent that told you there was somebody in the tunnels. We became so tuned up after a while that when the other person would flick an eyelid up or down, you really knew he was there. In the corner, not even hiding anymore, just sitting and waiting. They were the ones you never kill. You just backed out and told them up above the tunnel was cold. As well as using explosives and soldiers to go down the tunnels, there were other ways of clearing them, which included pouring liquid explosives down and then blowing it up after igniting it. There were other methods such as CS gas or smoke used to flush enemy soldiers out. But one tunnel network, known as the Chu Chi Tunnel, even had 130 miles of different passages and rooms, and there were different levels of these tunnels. They were so deep that when the B-52 bombers raided and dropped their bombs on the area, that these people were so deep underground they were safe. The tunnel rats were some of the bravest and most confident people who ever took the field of conflict, and these men went face to face with some of the most savage soldiers in history. They went into combat armed lightly, and many lost their lives because of the conditions of the tunnels, but also the actions of the enemy, who would collapse them when they realised that they were compromised. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.